What happens when a teenage boy's life collides with national security secrets? Jamal's fight for respect at school reveals more than he ever expected. Secrets, danger, and a powerful lesson in resilience. When Jamal Thompson stepped out of his father's old sedan, he felt like every eye was on him. Valley View High School, a prestigious private academy located on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, stood out with its towering iron gates and expansive, meticulously maintained grounds. From a distance, it looked like a fortress, a place where wealthy and powerful families sent their children to integrate into an elite society. Jamal adjusted the strap of his backpack, trying not to let the tension show on his face. He was used to walking past the judgmental stares of his classmates, but today he felt different than ever before. As he entered the school, he couldn't help but notice the luxury sports cars lined up along the driveway. The shiny cars were like symbols of success, while Jamal was just an ordinary kid, the son of a man who worked for a government agency. He was used to this kind of discrimination, but today, anxiety swelled in his chest. Jamal's father, Marcus, worked for national security, but when people heard about his job, no one believed it. His classmates couldn't grasp what that meant, and Jamal felt like an outsider, someone who didn't belong here. Taking a deep breath, Jamal made his way to the classroom, where all eyes turned to him. His classmates, children raised in powerful families, looked at him with curiosity mixed with skepticism. "You're Jamal Thompson, right?" Ms. Parker, the homeroom teacher, asked, her cold gaze seeming to evaluate every word he was about to say. "I hope you can give a good presentation about your father's career." Jamal's throat tightened. He had prepared everything, but how could he speak confidently about his father when no one believed what he was saying? He was all too familiar with the teasing of his friends. But facing Miss Parker, he couldn't help but feel fear rising within him. Jamal's father, Marcus, worked for an important security agency, but in this environment, identity and status were what mattered most. Jamal could clearly feel that everyone thought he was making up this story, and his self-doubt grew stronger. "Jamal, speak up," Miss Parker said, her voice dripping with mockery. Jamal felt his hands shaking, but he knew he had to continue. He took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that was soft but resolute. "My father works for a national security agency," Jamal began. His voice was weak, unable to control the nervousness within him. A few snickers echoed from his classmates, making Jamal even more embarrassed. The looks from his classmates made him feel small and insignificant. Jamal's father had always told him, "Be patient, son. Good things come to those who wait." But today, in front of this classroom, Jamal felt that all that faith was slowly slipping away. He glanced out the window, trying to find some peace amid the tense atmosphere. Ms. Parker stood at the front of the class, her eyes narrowing as if scrutinizing every move Jamal made. Her gaze made him feel uncomfortable. It was as if every step he took was being monitored, with no room for error. His classmates, children from powerful and wealthy families, kept whispering to each other. Jamal tried to swallow the lump in his throat, unable to understand why his words couldn't make anyone believe him. "Really? You're saying your father works for a national security agency?" Ms. Parker asked again, her voice cold, filled with deep skepticism. Jamal looked down at the desk, his fingers tightening slightly, but he didn't respond right away. He felt like a storm was building inside him. Everything around him seemed to blur, as if time was slowing down, and he was trapped in his own words. Taking a deep breath, he looked up at her, his eyes showing a strange sense of determination. "Yes, my father works for the National Security Agency. He protects this country," Jamal replied, his voice steadier now, though still unable to hide the unease inside. But as soon as he finished speaking, the whole class fell silent. The skeptical looks turned into outright mockery. Ms. Parker smirked and then turned back to class. "Well then, if your father really is such an important official, why don't you bring him here on Parents' Day to prove it? If he really is someone as important as you say, he surely wouldn't hesitate to show up." Her words were like a slap in the face to Jamal. He felt his face flush, a sense of shame rising in his chest. All the lessons his father had taught him about patience and confidence suddenly seemed meaningless. How could he invite his father here when everyone thought he was just a kid lying? As Ms. Parker turned away, Jamal stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the wooden desk in front of him. A sense of determination suddenly surged within him. He couldn't let himself be deceived any longer, couldn't remain silent while doubt took root. He would prove who his father was, and that everything he said was the truth. He will come, Jamal said with a firm voice, not allowing Ms. Parker's surprise to take over. The whole class went quiet. No one said a word, but Jamal could feel the change in the air. The looks were no longer critical, but laced with surprise and disbelief. Jamal knew that he had just staked his entire respect on a single decision, but he had no regrets. He wouldn't let go of his self-respect. As Parents' Day approached, Jamal felt like time was slowing down each day. The days before, he just wanted to forget everything that had happened in class. But now, he couldn't stop thinking about what was going to happen the next day. When he saw Ms. Parker, the homeroom teacher, wearing her smug smile in the following classes, a wave of self-doubt hit him. She still didn't believe in his father. She still thought he was just making up stories. And he still had to prove the truth. Jamal's father, Marcus, the man he admired for his strength and composure, never paid attention to the nonsense at school. But when Jamal told him about the challenge from Ms. Parker, Marcus just smiled, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "We'll show them, son." The night before Parents' Day, Jamal couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his small bed, looking out the window at the luxury cars parked along the driveway. He wondered if tomorrow everything would really be different, if he could face all those doubtful stares without being overcome by them. The next morning, Marcus was ready. The whole family got in the car, and Jamal sat in silence, feeling the tension in the air. His father checked his watch repeatedly, sometimes glancing at his phone, and Jamal couldn't help but notice the seriousness in his father's demeanor. "Stay calm, son," Marcus said when he noticed Jamal seemed anxious. "Everything will be fine. I'll prove to them that you're not lying." When they arrived at school, a crowd had gathered in front of the classroom, with parents and students mingling. Jamal could feel everyone's attention on him, and his heart raced. He spotted Ms. Parker, still wearing that self-satisfied grin. When Jamal walked into the classroom with his father, Marcus was dressed in a sharp black suit, the Department of Defense badge glinting on his chest. The room fell silent. All eyes from the students and parents turned to them, full of surprise. Ms. Parker no longer maintained her smug expression when she saw him. Jamal could see her smile fade in an instant. "Hello, everyone," Marcus said in a deep, commanding voice. "I'm Marcus Thompson, and I work for the United States Department of Defense. I'm here today to share with you about my work." The class fell silent, and a strange feeling spread through the air. The students who had once mocked Jamal were now speechless. Jamal looked at his father, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness, an unfamiliar feeling rising within him. But then, unexpectedly, a student stood up, and a surprising question echoed across the room. "Mr. Thompson, have you ever faced danger in your work?" the boy asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Marcus smiled, unshaken. "Yes, but our job is to ensure that those situations never happen. It's all about preparation and teamwork." Jamal felt the tension in his chest ease a little. He began to realize that things weren't always as he had imagined. What his father did might not just be a job, but a responsibility to protect the country. And today, he had helped Jamal prove that he wasn't a liar. After Marcus finished his presentation, the class remained silent, but Jamal could sense a change in the atmosphere. The looks that were once full of doubt now held less contempt. He noticed some of his classmates looking at his father with admiration, while others, like Tyler, still hadn't fully accepted that the kid in this class wasn't just making things up. Then, as a way to break the tension, another student, Emily, stood up. She had bright eyes and an understanding expression, almost like one of the few who could truly comprehend the work Marcus did. "Mr. Thompson, could you share a story about a time when you faced danger?" Emily asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Jamal couldn't help but smile. Emily's question was perfectly timed. It was an opportunity for his father to share things he had never talked about in front of him. Jamal had never fully understood his father's work, apart from the stories he had told when Jamal was younger. Now, he would get a chance to hear a story that perhaps only those in the field could truly understand. Marcus looked around the classroom. His eyes glowed with the calm and composure that only someone in national security could possess. There was a time when my team and I had to carry out an important mission in an area that was at risk of being attacked. We had to protect a region that, if not tightly controlled, could fall into the wrong hands at any moment. Marcus paused before continuing. My team and I had to work under immense pressure, but the key was not to let fear take over. We had to remain calm. Jamal listened, not taking his eyes off his father. He saw something he had never realized before. His father wasn't just someone working to protect the country. He was someone who had lived through situations that many people in the class couldn't even imagine. What he did wasn't for bragging rights, but for the safety of everyone. When the presentation ended, the atmosphere in the class lightened a little. Students began to stir, and a few whispered to each other. The mocking stares were gone, replaced by curiosity and admiration. Jamal saw the change in how people saw him. He no longer felt like an outsider. When the class ended, Jamal turned to look at his father, and Marcus smiled, a warm yet strong smile. "Well done, son," he said, his voice filled with pride. Jamal smiled back, but deep down he knew that today wasn't just his victory. It was a victory for the family, for perseverance, and for believing in the truth. He would never forget this moment. The moment when his father, an unsung protector in the eyes of many, had truly made the whole world around him take notice. After Parents' Day, Jamal couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The pride and joy of victory still lingered in his heart. But now, other worries began to creep into his thoughts. The change in his classmates' attitudes, especially Tyler, made Jamal realize that the respect he had received today was just a small part of a much bigger picture. He couldn't help but wonder why people could change so quickly after just one presentation. He remembered the jokes, the giggles, and now, just in one moment, they were looking at him differently. He felt like he was living in a world where words and actions could shift in a single day, and that was something Jamal couldn't control. At home, Marcus didn't show any sign of arrogance. He wasn't looking for recognition or praise. When Jamal told him about the change in his classmates' attitudes, Marcus just smiled gently. "You know, Jamal, sometimes people only see what they want to see," he said, his voice calm. "Today wasn't about seeking recognition. What matters is that you prove the truth and your belief in yourself. That's what's most important." Jamal listened to his father, and although he knew Marcus was right, a part of him still felt uneasy. He couldn't deny the feeling he had when seeing the admiring looks and the shift in his classmates' attitudes. It seemed like he was only respected because of his father, not because of who he was. He didn't want to just be the child of an important person. He wanted everyone to respect him for what he did and what he could achieve. The next day, when Jamal arrived at school, he felt a change in the atmosphere. The students in the class began approaching him more, no longer teasing or looking down on him. Tyler, the friend who had always mocked Jamal, even smiled at him as they passed in the hallway. "Hey, Jamal, I heard your dad is really someone special," Tyler said, his voice sounding somewhat awkward. "Sorry about what happened before." Jamal was surprised, but he just nodded, not saying anything further. He understood that sometimes change only happens when others truly see the truth. But instead of feeling satisfied, Jamal felt a little empty. He had won the battle for respect, but that victory didn't bring the joy he had expected. He remembered his father's words. Sometimes people only change when they are put in a situation they can't refuse. And that's when they have to reconsider everything they've ever thought. Jamal didn't need anyone's recognition except his own. He would continue on his path, proving that what he did and what he could achieve would be the greatest affirmation of his own worth. The tension still hadn't lifted from Jamal, even when he returned to school the next morning. Although things seemed to have changed slightly after Parents' Day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden behind the scenes. Tyler's apologies, though sincere, couldn't hide the discomfort Jamal felt. He felt like people were only starting to respect him because of his father, and that was something that made him uneasy. That day, in class, Jamal felt that the attention from everyone was no longer playful or mocking. The classmates who had once mocked him were now silent. No one made fun of him or looked at him with suspicion. But there was one thing that made Jamal even more anxious: Ms. Parker's silence. After the events of the day before, She no longer mocked or had a condescending attitude toward him. Instead, she just looked at him with a cold, unwelcoming expression. When class ended, Jamal walked out of the room with a strange feeling. He was sensing a change, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was. Part of him thought that perhaps Ms. Parker still hadn't forgiven him for making her look bad in front of the class. But he also knew that trying to win people over wouldn't help. He wanted others to respect him for who he was, not because of his relationship with his father. At home, Jamal couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. He didn't want to feel uneasy anymore. He had proven who his father was, and now it was time to prove himself. If I can stand tall after everything that's happened, I can do anything, he told himself. At dinner, when Marcus sat down with him, he could see the tiredness in his son's eyes. "How are you feeling, Jamal?" Marcus asked, his eyes gentle but filled with concern. Jamal smiled, feeling warmth in his heart. "I don't know, Dad. All of this, it just feels so strange." Marcus nodded, fully understanding what his son was going through. "You know, Jamal, sometimes people only realize the value of someone when they're tested. You've proven that you are strong. But never let other people's judgments take away your belief in yourself. As long as you know who you are, that's all that matters." Jamal listened, feeling a part of him relax. He understood that seeking recognition from those around him would never be the ultimate goal. His father had always taught him an important lesson. Never let other people's judgments define your self-worth. The next day, when Jamal walked into class, he no longer felt nervous or insecure. He would continue on his path, even though he might face difficulties. At least now he understood that true respect comes within, and no one could take that away. A few days after Parents' Day, Jamal began to feel a strange unease. He couldn't deny that things seemed to have changed, at least on the surface. His classmates no longer mocked him, and everyone was treating him more politely. But deep down, Jamal couldn't forget one thing. That feeling, that lingering doubt still remained within him. The looks, the words that seemed harmless from his friends, all carried something that Jamal couldn't fully feel at ease with. One late afternoon, while doing homework in his room, Jamal happened to notice the black SUV parked in front of his house again. He couldn't understand why an unfamiliar car would be there, and his mood instantly tensed. He stood up and moved toward the window, gently pulling back the curtain to observe. The car remained there, still as a shadow, like some lurking threat. Despite no clear signs of danger, Jamal felt that something was wrong. He saw a man dressed in dark clothes get out of the car, holding something in his hand that Jamal couldn't identify. The man stood for a few minutes, then walked toward the house. "Dad," Jamal called out, his voice trembling. "There's someone standing outside our house." Marcus, who had been working in the living room, didn't seem overly concerned. He stood up, walked over to Jamal, and looked out the window. "Let me check it out," he said softly. Though Jamal had never seen his father anxious, he could feel the tension in his movements. "Don't worry, son. I'll take a look," Marcus continued, his voice still calm, but his eyes had sharpened. He stepped outside, and Jamal followed, feeling like he was stepping into a different world, one where things no longer seemed normal. As Marcus stepped out the door, the car suddenly turned around and drove off. There was no honking, no signs that the man intended to stop. But what was strange was that the car didn't drive off in another direction. It stopped a few houses down, waiting. Marcus watched the car for a moment, then turned back to Jamal. "See, sometimes we have to wait to confirm something. Today is just a lesson in being cautious." Jamal looked at his father, confused. He couldn't understand why there was a strange car parked outside their house. He wanted to ask his father more, but Marcus simply shook his head gently. "Don't worry too much. It's just a precaution. If anything happens, we're always prepared." As they went back inside, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling of fear. Something was happening, but he couldn't fully understand it. The safety that Marcus provided wasn't just about what Jamal could see, but about what his father could sense from far away. He didn't know when the truth would gradually be revealed, but one thing was certain. Jamal had learned not to let fear control him. He had to be ready, just like his father. Although the black SUV had left, the unease in Jamal's heart hadn't dissipated. He couldn't stop thinking about the man in dark clothes who had stood outside their house. He felt like something was wrong, but Marcus remained calm, as if there was nothing to worry about. "Maybe it's just a delivery driver who couldn't find the right address," he had said, but Jamal couldn't shake the anxiety within him. The next morning, while they were having breakfast, Marcus received a call. He picked up the phone, and his demeanor suddenly changed. Jamal could clearly see the tension on his father's face as he exchanged a few brief words before hanging up. "Son," he said, his voice lowering, "we may be in serious trouble. I need you to be more careful in the coming days." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. "Serious trouble? Is someone watching us?" Marcus nodded but didn't answer immediately. He stood up, walked to a window, and looked outside once more, as if assessing the situation. After a moment of silence, he turned back and looked at Jamal with a serious expression. "There's a group trying to breach national security systems. I've taken some precautions, but they could be watching us." Jamal felt his whole body freeze. He couldn't believe that his normal life was being threatened by the dangers his father was facing. "What do we do now, Dad?" "Don't worry too much," Marcus replied, trying to reassure Jamal, but Jamal could still hear the tension in his voice. "I've notified my agency, and there are safeguards in place. However, I need you to be more alert in the coming days. Nothing is certain in my line of work, but I won't let anyone harm this family." By late morning, Marcus received an urgent notification. "We need to leave now," he told Jamal, not giving him a chance to ask any more questions. The two of them hurried outside, and Jamal could feel the tension in the air. His father wasn't just protecting the country anymore. Now, he was protecting their family. They both got in the car and started driving, but Jamal couldn't stop thinking about what was to come. He couldn't help but wonder what was really happening and why his father had to face such dangers. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let fear control him. With his father doing everything he could to protect the family, Jamal knew he had to learn to stand firm in the face of challenges. The unease didn't subside as Marcus and Jamal drove through the empty streets, the dim streetlights reflecting off the car's windows. Jamal couldn't stop thinking about what his father had said and the dangers they might face. He still didn't fully understand Marcus's job, but one thing was clear. His father was strong, and he would do everything to protect their family. "Dad, are we being followed?" Jamal asked. His voice betrayed his concern. Marcus glanced at the rearview mirror, then pressed the gas pedal, driving with intense focus. "Not always like this, Jamal, but in my line of work, sometimes you have to accept that things are unpredictable." He took a deep breath. "We won't let them affect our lives. However, you need to understand that sometimes protecting yourself isn't just about the physical aspect. It's about mental preparation. You have to always be ready to face whatever challenges come your way, no matter what they are." Jamal felt a wave of anxiety rise in his chest, but he also began to grasp the lesson in his father's words. He had once thought that his father's work was all dry, full of numbers and classified data he couldn't fully comprehend. But now, he realized that what his father did wasn't just about protecting the country, but also about the larger effort to protect his family, to protect the people he loved. "Dad, if we have to leave, what will I do?" Jamal asked, still feeling a bit lost. "Don't worry, son," Marcus replied, squeezing Jamal's hand across the seat. "Whatever happens, we always have a plan. Every decision is carefully calculated, and you need to trust in your preparation." Jamal nodded, feeling reassured by his father's words. He began to understand that sometimes we can't control everything around us, but we can control how we react to it. His father had taught him an important lesson. Preparation isn't just about material things. It's about being strong in mind and spirit. As the car continued down the dark roads, Jamal felt more confident. He no longer worried about what hadn't happened yet, because one thing he knew for sure was, no matter what, he would always have his father beside him, guiding and protecting him. And that was all he needed. A few days after the urgent phone call, things seemed to quiet down again, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Even though his father always assured him everything was under control, Jamal couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The threat still lingered in his mind, but now, a part of him had learned to face it more courageously. One evening, as Jamal sat down for dinner with Marcus, he couldn't help but feel a change in the atmosphere. Despite the continuing tension, he realized that he had learned a lot over the past few days. His father had always been a rock, but through every word, Jamal had started to learn calmness, patience, and the importance of being prepared. "Dad, I think I understand what you mean about preparation," Jamal said, his voice soft but full of determination. "I've worried so much about things I can't control, but now I realize that what matters most is how we respond to them. If I can stay strong, I'll always be able to overcome." Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You've learned the most important lesson. Sometimes the things outside of our control are things we can't change, but it's how we face them that truly creates strength. When you face fear and don't let it control you, that's when you are truly free." Jamal sat silently, reflecting on his father's words. He realized that, in life, we can't always control what happens around us. But what matters most is how we respond to those challenges. It's at those moments when mental preparation, resilience, and self-belief truly make all the difference. The next day, as Marcus stepped out of the house to go to work, Jamal watched his father walk out the door with a smile. He felt stronger, not just because of the lessons his father had taught him, but because he had learned to face the challenges life brought his way. "You'll be fine." Marcus turned back to look at him, his voice gentle yet resolute. "And remember, no matter what happens, you always have me by your side." Jamal nodded, feeling a strange sense of reassurance. He knew that life wouldn't be easy, but one thing was certain: he would always have his father, the one who taught him the lessons of resilience and how to overcome obstacles. And no matter where life took them, Jamal knew that as long as he was prepared and resilient, he would always find light in the darkest of times.